Yo, what is going on, everyone? My name is Nick, or the Notorious Fantasy, and in today's video, we're going to be breaking down my week number 5 wide receiver start or sit decisions for the 2024 fantasy football season. We're going to be going in depth through every single matchup on the week from Thursday Night Football all the way up until Monday Night Football, and I'll be telling you guys what I think you should start or sit the wide receivers in all of those games. It is important to note that this week we have 4 teams on bye with some real solid wide receivers. We got the Detroit Lions, the Tennessee Titans, the Philadelphia Eagles, and the LA Chargers. So if you have any players on those teams, make sure you take them out of your lineup. Before we get into things, though, make sure you guys do hit that subscribe button. If you are new, make sure you guys leave a like on today's video. Whether you are new to the channel or not, it would help me out a ton. If you have any questions, make sure you leave them down below. And if you would like to follow me on Twitter, make sure you do so at NotoriousFantasy. So without further ado, let's get into my week number 5 wide receiver start or sit decisions. We begin with Thursday Night Football, an NFC South division rivalry matchup between the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Atlanta Falcons in Atlanta. For the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Chris Godwin is a must-start at this point in the season. He has been reliable all season long. While his point total has been slipping over the last 2 weeks, he saw 9 targets in both of those games, and there is absolutely zero reason for you guys to panic. The Buccaneers offense is lethal, and Chris Godwin will continue to be a great bet to finish inside the top 12, so he's going to be a low-end wide receiver 1 for me on the week in Hotlanta. Now, Mike Evans is also a start, but he did not participate in practice on Monday with a knee/calf injury, so that is going to be something that you're going to want to follow until Thursday Night Football kicks off, because if Mike Evans isn't playing, you're not going to want to play him. Evans has been hot and cold thus far this season. He's had 2 games inside the top 6 at wide receiver and 2 games outside of the top 45, and even with his boom or bust nature, he still belongs inside of that high-end wide receiver 2 range to the low-end wide receiver 1s. Definitely going to have Godwin ranked ahead of him because Godwin is just significantly safer, but that doesn't mean that Mike Evans is a bad start. When he's healthy, you want him in your lineup. Jalen McMillan tweaked his hamstring during Friday's practice last week and missed the game up against the Eagles. Even if he does suit up, though, there is only one ball, and with so many talented players in this Buccaneers offense, McMillan's only going to get about a target or 2 every single week, so you cannot start him. For the Atlanta Falcons, Drizzy Drake London has received more targets each and every single week of the season, with 12 targets last week for 6 receptions and 64 yards up against the Saints. Better days are ahead for Drake London, especially since the Buccaneers defense is no bueno. They reek to high heaven, so I believe in Drake London this week, and I think he is still going to be a top 12 wide receiver in my rankings on the week. Now, Darnell, here comes the Mooney, is the opposite of a sexy start, right? When you think of the upside of a guy like Drake London, you think about the upside of a Mike Evans, a Chris Godwin, that is a sexy potential finish, right? Top 5, maybe even wide receiver 1. But Darnell Mooney isn't that. But in a matchup like this, I think Mooney will get it done. He's never going to be a guy that rips off 125 plus yards and a touchdown or 2, but he should see 6 to 8 targets and get enough catches to make him a fringe top 32 play. Again, it's not going to be fun as all. It's like you're kind of rocking a condom and you have some numbing cream on your meat, but hey, it will be fine enough to play him, especially in the matchup. So I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I love Darnell Mooney this week, but with teams on bye, Darnell Mooney is a fine replacement. Ray McCloud III is every once in a while going to have a decent game, and the most important thing about him, honestly, to note is the fact that it looks incredibly stupid that a wide receiver in the National Football League wears number 34. Kirk Cousins does appear to like him, though, but with London getting so many targets, same thing with Mooney, Ray McCloud is kind of just the odd man out. Next up, we move to London on Sunday. Set your alarms, wake up early. We got the New York Jumbo Jets at the cold like Minnesota Vikings. Now, if you are ranking Garrett Wilson inside the top 12 at the wide receiver position at this point in the season, you need your ball knowledge card revoked and thrown into the shredder. This man has not been a top 28 wide receiver all season, and now he's playing up against a Vikings defense that is fantastic. George Washington George Washington. Garrett Wilson is potentially going to get locked up. Don't let me out. Akon style again. And while the targets are there, nothing has been working. This is also a primetime game. So you already know primetime merchant Allen Lazard is going to end up balling out. Garrett Wilson will be ranked outside of the top 24 at the wide receiver position until something changes. Now, Lazard continues to operate as the wide receiver 2, as Mike Williams isn't getting that push to really elevate his game. Now, I did say that Lazard is a primetime merchant. He normally has a good game in primetime and scores a touchdown. At least that's been the case of every single game this year with the Jets. But ultimately, up against the Vikings defense, he belongs on the bench for Magic Mike Williams. If Rodgers didn't have such a hard-on for Lazard, I do think Mike Dubb would be eating in this offense, but Rodgers probably has one of those like I heart mom tattoos on his shoulder, but it says I heart Allen Lazard. So there is really no need to play Mike Williams at this point. For the Minnesota Vikings, a lot of people are going to be shaking in their boots. They're going to be trembling, thinking about how they can't start Justin Jefferson. But frankly, I don't care. I am going to fire up Justin Jefferson with supreme confidence. You could put primetime Dion on Justin Jefferson, and I promise you, Jay Jettas will find a way into the end zone to hit the gritty. He has scored a touchdown in every single game of the season and has been a top 17 wide receiver in every single game with 3 weeks in a row inside of the top 13. Sam Darnold, the mono man himself, is legit. This is a revenge game for him, and I believe that Jefferson belongs inside the top 10, and there are no ifs, ands, or but about it. Jordan Addison-Ray is going to be a start for me as well. He is going to continue to get amped up more in the offense because he has been hurt. He came back last week. He's going to see more and more snaps. Now, he is a bottom of the barrel start because I don't love this matchup. And typically games in London go out of whack. So maybe that will lead to Garrett Wilson going absolutely hog wild. But Jordan Addison had a great game last week, but he only had 5 touches. Now, he did end up totaling over almost 80 yards, and he had 2 touchdowns in that game. So the upside is certainly there against the Jets, but to truly believe in Addison and to rank him a lot higher, we need to see more targets come his way. Now, Jalen Nailor had the nail put in his coffin by the return of Jordan Addison. Now, does that mean that Jalen Nailor is completely dead for redraft? The answer to that would be yes, but he is going to have a good game every once in a while, but his stock has really plummeted like it was Black Monday. So while I think Jalen Nailor has the skills to pay the bills, and every couple of weeks he might find the end zone once or maybe even twice, but up against the Jets and with Addison back, no reason to chance it. Next up, we move to the later slate on Sunday, 1 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. The Carolina Panthers at the Chicago Bears. Now, Deontay Johnson last week told the Las Vegas Raiders, and he told the Bengals as well. So I guess technically the Raiders game was 2 weeks ago. The Bengals game was last week. He told them both, though, to fucking hold his Johnson. He was the wide receiver 6 in Las Vegas and the wide receiver 10 last week up against the Bengals. Touchdowns in back-to-back games and over 13 targets in both games. I am ecstatic. I am erect, bricked up underneath my desk to start Deontay Johnson in this spot, even if the matchup isn't necessarily the best. Like, this is far from a wet dream matchup, but Andy Dalton has turned Deontay Johnson into a weekly top 12 wide receiver. Xavier, somebody touching my Leggett, is the clear number 2 wide receiver behind Deontay Johnson. Last week, he went off as the wide receiver 13 with 6 catches on 10 targets for 66 yards and a touchdown. While I don't expect as solid of numbers this week compared to last week, right? Wide receiver 13 is fantastic. I don't think he will do it again, but I think we need to start putting some respect onto Leggett's name without Adam Thielen. Now, if you really start to glaze Leggett and are going insane, like, oh my God, now he's going to be like a locked and loaded top 24 wide receiver every single week, I'm not going to do that. Not going to go crazy after one game, but if you need that upside shot on your team, I think that Leggett is worthy of a fringe start, especially with all the teams on bye. While some people probably thought Jonathan Mingo might end up being the guy over Leggett, that is not the case, so there's no reason to play the Carolina Panthers wide receiver 3. Now, when it comes to the Bears, Shane Waldron has massacred my boy, DJ Moore. He has turned him into a worse version of himself, but with Caleb continuing to build and look better and better with the weeks going on, and with DJ Moore likely seeing 8 or more targets this week up against a suspect Panthers defense, I think we should see DJ Moore's best game yet. While this season hasn't given us the most amount of confidence to, fucking plant the flag in the earth and say DJ Moore is going to go crazy this week, I think it will be his best game yet, and I do believe he is a clear low-end wide receiver 2 on the week. Keenan Allen returned last week up against the Rams and had only 3 targets in that game. Odunze also only had 3 targets, so outside of DJ Moore, the wide receiver 2 spot in Chicago is as unclear as it gets, and I just don't feel confident in playing either guy as of right now. Next up, we move to a AFC North division rivalry matchup, the Baltimore Ravens at the Cincinnati Bengals in Cincinnati. Now, when it comes to the Baltimore Ravens, Flowers came out the gate on fire, right? The guy was as hot as it gets, like Megan Fox in the original Transformers. But then over the last 2 games, the ball hasn't been going his way. Now, it's very easy to explain why this is happening for Flowers, is that the game script is going away from the past because the Ravens have been up big in both of those games and are just running the rock with Derrick Henry. Right? You bring in Derrick Henry, you're winning big, you just run the ball gently down the stream, you start dripping the clock down, and Derrick Henry can run anyone over and have a huge game. So it's just great game script for that, but terrible game script for Zay Flowers. I personally thought the Bills game would be a lot more competitive, that the Bills would have some fight in them, and that Zay Flowers would get a lot more targets, but that wasn't the case. I do believe this week, though, the game should be closer, and they will have to pass, leading to Flowers bouncing back. My confidence level is definitely dwindling. I am not going to sit here and pretend like I'm 100% confident in Zay Flowers based upon what we've seen over the last couple of weeks, but I do think he's still good enough to rank him inside of the top 24 range. Maybe you want to rank him like 25 or 26, but around that low-end wide receiver 2, high-end wide receiver 3 range. For the rest of the Ravens, Rashad Bateman had just 1 target last week, and he's normally like a 4 or fewer target per week type of guy. Him and Aguilar are about as exciting as the day you have to go ahead and get a colonoscopy, so you definitely want to sit both of them down. For the Cincinnati Bengals, with Higgins looking better and with Andre Yoshivas now stumbling and bumbling back down to just getting a couple of targets a game, I still think Yoshivas is a very talented player, and if something was to happen to Jamar Chase or T. Higgins, knock on wood, we don't root for injuries, then Yoshivas could be a guy that we're weekly talking about as a high-end flex play. We're weekly talking about as a great wide receiver 2 option, depending on the matchup, but as of right now, we don't live in that reality. We live in the reality where Chase and Higgins are healthy, so it is not possible to play him as of right now. Jamar Chase didn't explode like Vincent Chase's career in Entourage following the Aquaman movie, but against the Panthers, he had a solid showing with over 17 fantasy points. Now, obviously, when you have the wet dream spot against the Panthers, I and many of you probably expected maybe something slightly better, maybe a fucking 30 bomb in that game, but hey, still got over 17 points, so I'm not going to panic too much. This week up against the Baltimore Ravens, I will continue to bang the drum for Chase as a top end option weekly. He is a must start top five wide receiver for me. Tee Higgins looked better last week, and that's great. He came back up against the Commanders in week 3, and he didn't look the best, but obviously, I assumed that was going to happen. I think most people knew, hey, they might ease him in. That was the case last week, though. He had 6 receptions on 10 targets for 60 yards. Better days are ahead for T. Higgins, but with Jamar clearly being the number 1 target, Higgins is more of a low-end wide receiver 2 to a high-end wide receiver 3 in this spot. Next up, we move to game number 5 here. My Miami Dolphins at the New England Patriots. But before we break this game down, I would like to give you guys a quick word for our friends and our partner over at Underdog. Now, if you're new to Underdog and sign up with code Notorious or by clicking on the link in the video description or in the pinned comment, you'll receive a free pick plus a first-time deposit offer of up to $1,000 in bonus cash. Now, the free pick, if you're watching this prior to Thursday Night Football, is Kirk Cousins higher than half of a total yard. You're going to match that with any players playing on Sunday or any players playing in the Buccaneers side of the game. And if those two picks hit, you receive 3 times what you put into your pick'em. If you put in multiple other picks, then the payout will obviously be higher. Now, if you're watching this after Thursday, then you'll receive a different free pick that's very similar to Kirk Cousins, higher than half of a total yard. Again, sign up with promo code Notorious to claim your free pick, plus a first-time deposit offer of up to $1,000 in bonus cash. So back on into things, we got the Dolphins at the Patriots, and the Dolphins game up against the Titans, as a fan, made me sick to my stomach. Mike McDaniel is sitting there with a thumb up his ass, calling all of these confusing plays that I know Tua knows how to do, but there is no way in hell Tyler Huntley knows how to do that with him showing up just a couple of weeks ago, and it left Tyler Huntley shook. We do so many motions, and guys are not getting set, and there are so many flags on the field because of it. They are not getting set. He's not ready to do these things. The stupid backwards pass to Tyreek that ends up being a fumble. Everything went wrong. Now, I know what you'd be thinking, Nick, they lost Tua. Why are you so mad? Like, you should have known this was going to happen. When Malik Willis is winning games in a Green Bay Packers fucking uniform, you better believe, I believe, that Mike McDaniel should be able to figure this out, and he hasn't figured it out. I don't think anything will change for this team until Tua comes back and until McDaniel, the quote-unquote super genius, actually figures out how to call a correct game for Tyler Huntley, who is the starting quarterback this week, according to Mike McDaniel. He announced earlier today on Tuesday. Ultimately, Tyreek was open multiple times in that game. There were multiple chances up against the Titans defense to get loose, but instead, the ball doesn't come his way. He does diddly squat. He was the wide receiver 51. Now, you're still going to have to consider him as a start. Why? Because he's Tyreek fucking Hill. There's crazy upside, but he's no longer a top 24 guy, no longer a top 10, top 5 guy. He's a high-end wide receiver 3 due to the upside, but I just have zero hope at this point. He is just screwed until Tua comes back. Now, if you're panicking about Tyreek, who is one of the most dominant wide receivers in the NFL, then it is DEFCON 1 for Mr. Jalen Waddle away, Waddle, till the very next day. Now, I love Jalen Waddle, and I hope the team figures it out, but you just can't play them right now. Tua will be allegedly back in Week 8 up against the Cardinals, so if you can survive until then, you're going to be happy with what Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill, Devon Achane can do, but right now, there is no need to play Jalen Waddle. I would rather get my nutsack stapled to my grundle than play Jalen Waddle. Frankly, there is no need to play him. Braxton doesn't even have a single catch this season. That's all we're going to say about him. For the Patriots, guys, it seems like every week Douglas DeMario teach me how to Dougie-less, or Jalen Polk will be the number 1 wide receiver. But until they end up switching things up and pulling the plug on Jacoby Brissett and going with Draco May, the offense will not be productive enough to want to start any of these wide receivers, Douglas, Polk, Osborne, and friends. Next up, we move to the Cleveland Browns at the left hands up. Who are we? The Commanders? Now, let me know down below in the comment section what team you think is going to trade for Davante Adams. Davante Adams put out the trade request. Seems like he's going to get traded. Will he go to the Jets? Will he go to the Commanders? That's been a rumor. Where's he going to go? Maybe neither of those teams. Maybe he's a Buffalo Bill. Maybe he goes somewhere unexpected. Let me know your prediction down in the comment section. We'll definitely talk about that if a trade happens. I would be shocked if a trade happened, though, today. And, of course, if something ends up coming out, we'll just have to make a video about that, discussing it. So, with the Cleveland Browns going up against the Washington Commanders, the Commanders' offense is a straight-up wagon. Terry McLaurin has been a top 16 wide receiver in back-to-back games and scored a touchdown in both games. Jaden Stormy Daniels has been unstoppable like Mike Vick back in Madden 04, and that has taken Terry McLaurin to another level. Terry McLaurin has been rinsed his entire career by shitty quarterback play, and finally, McLaurin has Jaden Daniels, who is ascending him to another level. And with the offense firing on all cylinders, he should be considered as a high-end wide receiver 2 weekly. For Christian McCaffrey's little brother and Noah Brown, they both look decent, but ultimately not enough volume goes their way to consider playing them. For the Cleveland Browns, Amari Cooper followed up his top 5 performance up against the Giants in week 3 as the wide receiver 58 last week up against the Viva Las Vegas Raiders. Now, the targets continue to be there with 8 or more every single fucking game, and up against the Commanders, he should be able to finish as a top 24 wide receivers. But Watson is very clearly holding him back. Jerry Jeudy is basically locked and loaded, in my opinion, to being a fringe start every single week of the season. He has seen 6 or more targets in every single game and has been a top 33 wide receiver in 3 of 4 games. I don't think he really has as much upside as Cooper has, since Cooper is just a significantly better wide receiver, and Cooper also had a touchdown that was called back last week, which hurt like a butt cheek on a stick if you had Amari Cooper. But if you need 10 to 13 points, Jerry Jeudy is that guy. Elijah Moore, unless you're related to the guy, you shouldn't have him on your fantasy team. And even if you are like a distant cousin of Elijah Moore, you still need to cut him. Next up, we got game number 7, lucky number 7, and it is the Indianapolis Colts at the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, you might be thinking, Nick, how is Michael Pittman a sit? Now, it's very simple. Very simple. Anthony Richardson is considered day-to-day with oblique and abdominal strains, which means he could play on Sunday. I'm going to give out 2 scenarios here. If he plays, then you can't play any Colts wide receivers. Dikembe, no. Rest in peace to him. He died yesterday. None, and I guess that didn't really sound the kindest. He died. He passed away yesterday, so I am sad to hear that. Shout out to Dikembe Mutombo. None of the wide receivers will be reliable enough with AR's play to actually play them. Pittman feasted like it was Easter dinner last week. He had a fucking ham for 6 receptions and 113 yards as the wide receiver 20, which is by far his best finish on the season. As prior to last week, he has never even cracked the top 50 wide receiver mark this season. And he also had more yards last week than he had combined from the first 3 games of the season. So if AR plays, you sit him. If Cool Joe Flacco is under center, then you fire up Pittman as a confident top 18 wide receiver. If AR is in, you bench Pittman, and it's very likely that he probably falls outside the top 50. Again, Josh Downs, the same analysis is applied to Josh Downs. Now, Michael Pittman is going to be ranked higher than Josh Downs if Cool Joe Flacco is under center, but Downs would be a wide receiver 3/flex play because he looked great against a tough Steelers defense, right? He's coming back off the injury. He is the wide receiver 8 receptions on 9 targets for 82 yards and a touchdown. He's getting ramped up more and more in terms of snaps, and that's great. The positive, but again, if Anthony Richardson plays, you just can't start him. Alec Pierce had a nice Mickey Mouse run to start off the season as a top 12 wide receiver in back-to-back, or top 20 wide receiver in back-to-back weeks. But I told you guys even back then that the good times won't last, and that's really just his best case scenario. Have 2 solid games, maybe pulls out another one out of a fucking rabbit out the hat style, but frankly, he belongs on waivers. For the Jacksonville Jaguars, we got Christian Kirk and BTJ, Brian Thomas Jr. as starts. Christian Kirk has came alive. He's alive, Frankenstein style, over the last 2 weeks as a top 24 wide receiver. Last week in Houston, he was the wide receiver 14 with 7 catches on 12 targets for 61 yards and a touchdown. The targets have been hefty, like the garbage bag brand, with 10 or more in back-to-back weeks. So I feel a lot more confident in Kirk right now. Still, though, I will note that Lawrence hasn't played the best, and the team as a whole is relatively no bueno. But even with those concerns, I do think you should consider him as a low-end wide receiver too. With Kirk, being all over the place this season, Brian Thomas Jr. has been solid all year long, a lot more consistent than Christian Kirk. Last week was his best game on the season. Brian Thomas Jr., he went 6 of 9. Very nice. I like my wife. My name is Borat for 86 yards and a tug. I think ultimately he is a more talented player than Christian Kirk, but Kirk should be getting more targets. Simple arithmetic. If you're going to get more targets, and, BTJ might be better than Kirk, but it's not by like this crazy wide margin. It's not like Christian Kirk is some fucking buffoon out there with butterfingers. So BTJ will be ranked 1 or 2 spots behind Kirk, putting them in essentially the same tier at the wide receiver position. Gabe Davis is almost as useful as just having a hole straight up in your head. And if you have him on your team, there's no reason to hold on to him. He's barely involved in the offense and is yet to crack 10 fantasy points on the year. Please cut him if you got him on your squad. Next up, we got the Buffalo Bills. No one circles the wagons like the Buffalo Bills at the Houston Texans. Very exciting game. Now, the Buffalo Bills did just get their head bounced off of a canvas by the Baltimore Ravens, and Khalil was the wide receiver 47 in that game. But I think Khalil Shakira is going to bounce back in this spot. He has been a top 32 wide receiver in every other game of the season, and the targets have been around 5 a week, which isn't the best, but he is clearly Josh Allen's favorite weapon, so he has to be a mid-tier wide receiver 3/flex type of player. Keon Coleman looked solid last week, outside of that drop that he 100% should have caught, but at this point in the season, the only wide receiver worth a damn is Khalil Shakir. Maybe one day, Magic City on a Monday, we will turn to Coleman, but that day is not today. Next up, we move to Mac Hollins here, Dolphins legend himself. Typically gets like a target or 2. No need to roster him, no need to start him, no need to break him down a bunch. For the Texans, 9-inch Nico Collins. At this point, we cannot deny the greatness that is Nico Collins. I hope everyone all summer that told me, Nick, you can't trust Collins. You're a buffoon. You can't draft him. Oh my God. It's too much of a split, Nick. He can't be good. And now look at you. You look like a real silly goose. But we're going to be talking about a guy that I was wrong about in just a couple of seconds. So it's okay to be wrong, guys. I'm going to be wrong. You're going to be wrong. It's okay. I just like doing these fun victory laps because, it feels good, to be right sometimes, right? It just feels good. Last week against Jacksonville, the man scored 33 fantasy points with 12 receptions on 15 targets for 151 yards and a touchdown against the Bills. Defense, I think Nico Collins should definitely be ranked inside of the top 5. Stephon Diggs. Now, whether or not Tank Dell plays or not, Diggs has cemented himself as a mid-tier wide receiver 2 weekly. He has been a top 15 wide receiver in 3 or 4 games, and it feels like he is the clear number 2 wide receiver on the team, and at this point, that feels undisputed. It's not even close. He has had 9 or more targets in back-to-back games, and things are looking very solid for Diggs. Again, I just victory lapped Nico Collins. I felt like a fucking genius for being all over him, no diddy, but with Diggs, I faded him, and that was wrong. So I'll acknowledge that I was wrong. I thought that Tank Dell was going to be the number 2 receiver, and that really hasn't been the case. Keep rocking with Diggs. Feels like a nice condom wrap around your team, real safe. This game could be a real tit-for-tat, back-and-forth, high-scoring affair, which could lead to both Diggs and 9-inch Nico Collins going crazy. Tank is expected to return from his chest injury this week, but with his play all season being straight-up ass, even with the upside of his play, with Diggs and Nico playing so well, I'm just not going to start him. Next up, we got game numero 9 here. We got the Las Vegas Raiders at the Denver Broncos. The Broncos coming off of a W. The Raiders coming off of a W as well. Courtland Sutton is experiencing a buffet-style level of targets every single week. He went to the Chinese buffet with Eddie Lacy, but hopefully Eddie Lacy didn't drive him home because today he was cited as having an extreme DUI, which I've never heard of before. I've heard of a DUI, but never an extreme one. 9 or more targets in 3 or 4 games for Courtland Sutton. Now, I'm not going to sit here and pretend like Bo Nix is some legend and that Bo Nix deserves to be sucked dry like a golf ball through a garden hose, but if he keeps forcing the ball Sutton's way, eventually he's going to flourish. Now, the upside is still limited, as the balls haven't been the prettiest out of Nix. Pause. At the end of the day, though, he's just a fringe start option at best if No teams were on bye this week. He would have been a sit. Josh Reynolds, Marvin Mims. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here yapping about any of the other wide receivers on the Broncos. I don't truly trust Nicks, so I can't play any of those guys not named Sutton. And even Sutton, I don't really love playing here. For the Raiders, Jacoby Myers had 10 targets last week up against the Browns and managed to score fewer than 10 fantasy points. With Devontae Adams now likely being traded, it is officially Jacoby Myers season, but against a sneaky good Broncos defense, I would definitely be hard-pressed to start Myers, as if PS2 Patrick Surtain II is on Jacoby Myers, he is going to potentially put up like 3 fantasy points. Trey Tucker, I barely knew her, scored a touchdown in back-to-back games and has looked solid, but again, I think we need to start putting some respect on the name of the Broncos defense, and I doubt he'll luck into a touchdown again, so he's a sit. DJ Turner also scored a touchdown last week on his sole rush. He also had 1 target. He isn't a great player, doesn't get a lot of volume. You don't play him. Next up, we move to the Arizona Cardinals at the San Francisco 49ers. Now, last week for the Cardinals, the game started off great for Marvin Harrison Jr. The man ended up finding the end zone early on against the Commanders, but then the team started getting bent over a table, and the game went away from Marv. He still had 5 receptions on 6 targets for 45 yards and a touchdown, but I personally thought he would have ended up putting up more points, but it is what it is, you know? Still to find enough game. You might have lost because Marvin Harrison didn't go crazy, but he's not going to be the only reason why you lost, because he still had a good enough of a game. This matchup against the 49ers isn't the greatest, but Marv has earned his spot inside the top 12 weekly, and he's a must-start for me. Michael Wilson and Greg Dortch seem like they will flip-flop in terms of targets every single week, which makes none of them a good bet to play in fantasy football. Deebo Samuel returned last week from an injury and had a letdown game as the wide receiver 46. But can you really be that mad? Because when guys come back off of injuries, you can have the hope, right? Sometimes they come back and they look like they never left. Sometimes they play and they don't look the same. I expect the workload to increase as he gets more and more healthy, and that will lead to more consistency. I love this spot against the Cardinals defense, and with how Deebo looked prior to the injury, I feel confident ranking him as a mid-tier wide receiver 2. Brandon Ayuk, people are going to rank him inside the top 24, right? They're just going to do that, right? Oh, I drafted him as top 24 wide receiver, despite the fact that we've already seen 4 games. Despite the fact that we kind of know how Brandon Ayuk has been, we're still going to rank him high, right? Oh, he's one day, he's going to crack that mark, right, guys? And while, frankly, that does make sense, right? At the end of the day, he probably will become a top 24 wide receiver, right? The season isn't completely lost, but I'm going to go ahead and teach him a lesson, right? I'm going to say, you don't want to perform for me, buddy? Guess what? Welcome to the fucking bench, right? Now that he knows he's been demoted by me and by you guys, he will start to level up, right? That's just proper coaching from us as fantasy managers. You got to coach up the team. 4 straight games outside the top 40, and nothing makes me confident that we finish higher than that just yet. I know some of y'all will be down bad, and you're like, oh, fuck, I got to start him. But I'm going to teach the guy a lesson. He's going on the bench. Jawan Jennings with Deebo and Kittle healthy, with Jawan Jennings' hype train has now came to a halt. Now, he did outscore Ayuk last week, but the touches are going to drop and be less reliable, so I don't really feel confident at all when it comes to playing him. Next up, we move to the Green Bay Packers at the Los Angeles Rams. With Jordan Love healthy, Jaden Riley-Reed has been the wide receiver 2 last week up against the Vikings, and the wide receiver 1 in Brazil up against the Eagles in week 1. Now, I'm not going to sit here and pretend like this is going to be every single week. He's a top 3 wide receiver, but as someone that was one of the biggest Reed truthers that I know, I don't know how many other fantasy analysts were really given the Sukalamink special, the hawk to spit on that thing when it comes to Jaden Reed. Maybe some of you guys were. Maybe you were, maybe you in the comments, you were with me, you were rocking with Jaden Reed, but a lot of people didn't seem to be as big of truthers. So I feel pretty vindicated with what I said. At this point, Reed needs to be ranked inside the top 10. I also don't believe the Packers are going to come out looking as sluggish. Jordan Love threw a bunch of picks at the beginning, but he started to wisen up as the Vikings defense kind of softened up. I think the offense looks a lot more complete, though, in this game. Dontavian John Wicks, while I am not going to sing some beautiful opera here like Justin Tucker, For Wicks, like I just did for Jaden Reed, where I waxed poetically about him, Wicks was the wide receiver 3 last week with 5 receptions on 13 targets for 78 yards and 2 touchdowns, playing 76% of the snaps. I still think he will end up getting out-snapped by Dobbs and by Reed, but he should be second in targets as he always plays well with Love when injuries have occurred to the team, and against the Rams, he should have another big showing. Again, the key word there, though, is should. They still have Dobbs. They still have other wide receivers. They got Tucker Kraft. They got Josh Jacobs, so he's in the wide receiver 3/flex range. For Romeo Dobbs, he had 8 targets for 4 receptions and 39 yards last week. Love did suck him off all offseason long, loving his touchdown upside, so it is possible he pops off, but I do have Reed and Wick strongly above him and wouldn't feel confident ranking him in that wide receiver 3 range with Wicks, which would make him a start, but he is close to being a start if you're down bad at wide receiver. Speaking of close of being a start, Tutu Atwell is also in that range where the receiving yards have been there, but it feels like out of all of them, the receivers I'm speaking about in LA, Whittington is the most likely to truly get fed, which leaves Atwell on the outside looking in. Atwell played the most amount of snaps on the team last week. He had 8 targets. That really throws Demarcus Robinson, into being cut-worthy in fantasy, and you could just pick up Atwell or Whittington. I am just not super excited about starting any of these guys because it doesn't really feel 100% clear who the guy is. And I think the Packers defense is a bit underrated as well. And all of the red zone touches you already fucking know are going to Kyren Williams. So it is just kind of a situation where I'm avoiding them. Next up, we move to the final game before the double primetime games, Sunday Night Football and Monday Night Football. So if you guys have enjoyed, make sure you guys hit that subscribe button like it owes you some money. Lightly caress that like button. I would appreciate it a ton. The G-Men, the Giants at the Seattle Seahawks. Now, Malik Neighbors, the Seattle Hawks, spit on that thing. Get it? I don't even think that joke is really all that funny. I just like saying it because I know for sure, at least deep down, maybe one of you guys think that's funny. So Malik Neighbors suffered a concussion towards the end of that game up against the Cowboys last week on Thursday Night Football, and that means his availability for this game is a huge question mark. Now, I have said all season, anytime someone gets a concussion, they might come back just a couple of days. They might be out multiple weeks. So we're sitting here on Tuesday. I feel pretty uncertain on having a strong stance, strong conviction either way. Now, since the game he suffered the concussion in was on Thursday, that gives Neighbors some extra time to recover, which would lean towards him potentially being able to play more. But again, concussions are very tough, and he could easily not play. He could easily play. Ultimately, for the sake of today's video, we'll pretend that he plays, because if he doesn't play, you would just sit him. If he plays, he is a clear top 6 wide receiver going forward. 3 straight weeks doing so, and he has gotten 12 or more targets in all of those games where he's been a top 6 wide receiver. I get that Daniel Jones isn't the fucking sharpest knife in the cupboard. He's not the best quarterback ever. But if he continues to force feed the ball to Neighbors, then you're just going to have to blindly believe in him, bird box style. Next up, we got Mr. 305, Pitbull's favorite wide receiver, Wan'Dale Robinson. Wan'Dale's rankings will move up a bunch based upon Neighbors' availability. If Neighbors is in, Wan'Dale is in that high-end wide receiver 3 range. If Neighbors is out, you could argue that you might want to rank him inside the top 24. His targets have been off of the charts with 8 or more in 3 of 4 games and 12 or more in 2 of 4 games. While he is strictly a PPR or half PPR merchant if you're in standard, there's no reason to play him because he barely does anything with the catches. If you're going to get that many fucking targets a game, you're going to have a decent enough game. So he should be a weekly consideration to start weekly just due to the touches. Darius Slayton with Wan'Dale and Neighbors seeing so many looks weekly that puts Slayton on the outs of having a fantasy relevant game. Though even if Neighbors misses against a Seattle defense that I believe to be solid, playing Slayton would be far too cute. DK Metcalf was about a iPod mini's length away from having a touchdown last week on Monday Night Football, which would have been huge because he already had a good game, over 100 yards, 7 receptions, but that would have made the day even bigger. Metcalf, outside of week 1, when he was locked up, don't let me out by Patrick Surtain, he has been an incredibly reliable piece to your fantasy team. This week against the Giants defense that just got bent over a table by the Lambster, CeeDee Lamb, I expect a top 10 showing out of Metcalf, especially since the Seahawks offense continues to cook like that Cooking Mama game back on the Wii. If you ever played that, let me know in the comments section. I never had that game, but my one friend, Jamie, had that game. Shout out to Jamie if you're watching today's video. Interesting story. Back in the day at Jamie's house, we were playing Mario Kart, and I was winning, and I jumped up and down. I was 8 or 9 probably at this point. I don't even think I was 10. I was jumping up and down, and I fucking was jumping up and down so much, which was stupid, but I'm a kid, so, whatever, right? It was stupid. But he had a bunch of these things that were on top of, because back in the day, your TV wasn't mounted to a wall. It was in this giant fucking, I don't even know what you would call a stand. And it had a bunch of stuff on top of where, the TV's in there. And then on top of the TV, there's a place you can put stuff. And there was a bunch of stuff up there. And he had a bunch of magic kits. And I jumped and a magic kit hit me in the head. I think I might have been the first one out of my friends, anyone that I knew that had CTE, because I got fucking demolished by that thing, and I got knocked out, KO'd, Mike Tyson punch-out style. My friends bring it up all the time, so if any of my friends are watching, hopefully they enjoyed that story, because we do talk about it every once in a while. But yeah, he had Cooking Mama. That's why we talked about this. So JSN, while Metcalf has been the guy, JSN has looked good as well. 8 receptions on 12 targets last week for 51 yards up against the Lions. There is still always, though, the worry with JSN that Lockett will steal his lunch money, as we have already seen it happen this season. But due to the amount of upside he has, you should consider JSN in that low-end wide receiver 2 to high-end wide receiver 3 range, especially up against the Giants. Tyler Lockett in my pocket. Skirt. Targets continue to come his way, but he hasn't done much with them. Lockett is, we heard Antonio Pierce talking about, the Raiders coach, about business decisions, right? Lockett, you go in the Webster's dictionary, find business decision. There's a picture of Lockett there. He has so many opportunities to juke a guy out of his cleats, or maybe hurdle someone, make a crazy play, spin move, hit circle on your PlayStation controller, and score a touchdown, but instead he just goes down. He loves to go down. He's like fucking Junior in The Sopranos. I respect it, but ultimately that's what stops Lockett from being playable in fantasy, because even when he does get a decent amount of targets, the yards are few in between, and with little red zone looks, he cannot be trusted. Now we move to, cause you waited all day for Sunday night, the Dallas Cowboys at the Pittsburgh Steelers. CeeDee Lamb was the wide receiver 4 last week in MetLife against the Giants, putting up 7 receptions for 98 yards and a touchdown, which was his first big game of the year. I get that the matchup against the Steelers is far from ideal, but with how the Colts passing attack and Flacco looked up against them last week, you definitely should not be burying Lamb down the rankings just because the matchup. He could easily elbow drop the Steelers defense and is a must-start top 3 wide receiver for me, and that's kind of a no-brainer, right? Everyone already knew that. If you have CeeDee Lamb as one of your wide receivers, you didn't need me to sit here and fucking fellatio the guy for you to notice start him. Brandon Cooks last week, I spent some time discussing how Brandon Cooks might have been passed up by Jalen Tolbert, like what Jackson Storm did to my man Lightning McQueen in Cars 3. And while that still could very much be the case, neither guy has an insane lead over the other, and that makes both of them sits with how involved Jake Ferguson is in this offense. So Cooks, Tolbert, you sit them both, especially up against the Steelers. Now, George Pickens' performance last week brought a smile to my face. While he didn't score up against Indy, in Indy, he had 11 targets, 7 receptions for 113 yards. If the offense continues towards passing more, which they've done over the last 2 games, then Pickens could become incredibly reliable. But, and this is a big but, shout out to Jennifer Lopez, I wouldn't hang my hat on that being the case. He feels like a solid low-end wide receiver 2 this week to kind of the low-end wide receiver 3 type of thing. So Calvin Austin III is either going to pop off for 15 plus points with a touchdown, or he's going to have a grand total of 2 fantasy points, with him most likely being on the 2 fantasy point side of things. I'm not going to start him. Van Jefferson, everything I just said about Calvin Austin, where, oh, he could score 15 plus points. He could get that touchdown, have that big game. The same exact thing could be applied to Van Jefferson. It's just Van Jefferson hasn't done this season, and Calvin Austin has once. Again, that's not me belittling Van Jefferson, but let's be honest, no one's playing the fucking wide receiver 2 and 3 on the Steelers. Final game here, we got Monday Night Football, the Saints at the Chiefs. Now, for the Saints, Olave has been solid over the last 2 weeks, ripping off back-to-back games with 16 or more points. Now, I would be lying if I said I love this matchup against the Chiefs defense, but with Chris Olave playing so well the last couple of weeks, and especially last week, considering he had the hamstring injury pop up, I think we should be very confident in Olave moving forward with how rock solid the Saints offense is. He saw 10 targets last week in Atlanta, and that is possible in any given game. I won't lock him in as like a top 5 or even like a top 8 type of wide receiver, but he feels like a good bet to be a high-end wide receiver 2 to a low-end wide receiver 1 weekly. Now, Rashid Shaheed was a guy that everyone jumped ship off. Oh my God, Nick, he had a bad week 4. I finally started him and he shit the bed, right? And they abandoned him. But then I said, don't abandon the ship yet. Ride with him one more time. He had one more target than Olave with 11 last week for 8 receptions, 83 yards as the wide receiver 25. And again, after laying that goose egg against the Eagles, everyone really panicked and I said, don't. It feels like we should continue to throw Shaheed in that wide receiver 3 range. It is incredibly unlikely that he ends up seeing 8+ targets again, but with him being a solid deep threat with 18+ point upside due to it, I think the upside greatly outweighs the risk in this Clint Kubiak offense. So while he's not going to crack the top 24, he has a solid wide receiver 3/flex option. Mason Tipton, brother, cousin of London Tipton, has just 4 receptions on the season, but he has played the 3rd most amount of snaps at the wide receiver position most weeks for the team, so he's going to make the video. But you don't really need to know anything about him. You're not going to roster him. Now we go to the Chiefs. Personally, if you had both Worthy and Shaheed, I would be starting Shaheed because I feel like Shaheed is just way safer. Worthy, even without Rice, in my opinion, doesn't really profile as a player that's going to see an insane amount of volume. Now, the targets could see a slight bump up, but he is not going to inherit the large target share that Rice had. And based on the most recent report, maybe Rashee Rice isn't done for the season, but the injury is still severe enough for a while. Again, I'm not going to say, oh, he didn't tear his ACL, but the reports are a little bit more optimistic than I would have thought, a day ago when I saw the injury. Even with Rice out for a majority of last week's game up against the Chargers due to Patrick Mahomes doing the dumbest thing possible and trying to make a tackle. The guy is worth $7 gazillion fucking dollars. And he tries to make a tackle in week 4. It's not in the Super Bowl, sure. You know what? If he took out Rashee Rice's ACL, trying to make a stop in the Super Bowl, I would be pissed, but I would respect it. But not in week fucking 4 against the Chargers, Patrick Mahomes. What are you doing? What are you doing? He tackled his best player and took him out. Worthy had only 4 targets in that game, while he put up 3 receptions for 73 yards and a touchdown. You need the score from Worthy to be solid, and the Saints' defense is good enough, so I can't guarantee it. He is just a lower-end start range behind Shaheed. Now, it seems like without Rice, the team is going to feed the tight ends. Justin Watson had just 3 targets last week, and if he does become the number 2, he may be worthy of a pickup, but as of right now, there's 0 reason to risk starting him, especially since the Chiefs offense doesn't look like the Chiefs offense that we thought they would be this season. The TikTok GOAT, Corvette, Juju Smith-Schuster played 52% of snaps last week, but didn't earn a single target. Just like with Watson, unless we see Juju get fed with targets, you cannot play him. So thank you guys all so much for watching today's video. If you did end up enjoying, make sure you guys hit that subscribe button down below. And while you're down there, whether you are new to the channel or not, please make sure that you do leave a like on today's video. It would help me out a ton. Make sure you guys do also check out Underdog Fantasy, promo code Notorious to receive that first pick that you can see on the screen right now. Kirk Cousins higher than half of a total yard, plus a first-time deposit offer of up to $1,000 in bonus cash. I love you guys all so much. Hope you have a great rest of your guys' day. Check out one of the videos on the screen if you haven't seen them already. Again, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button. Have a great one. As always, good boy.